participants who are joining us for the first time. The Indian Society of Criminology was established in 1970 at the Department of Criminology, University of Madras, with the objective of advancing the study and application of criminology and allied sciences. Over the past 55 years, it has grown into a national professional body with more than 2,200 members from academia, law enforcement, corrections, law, and allied disciplines in India and abroad. The Society has organized 45 All India Criminology conferences, publishes the Indian Journal of Criminology, and has consistently contributed to strengthening criminological scholarship and professional engagement in the country. The Crime, Justice and Society Dialogue lecture series has been conceived as bi-weekly academic platform to bring together scholars from India and across the world. The aim is to create an accessible space for meaningful engagement with criminological theory, research, comparative perspectives, and contemporary issues, especially for students and early career scholars. I would also like to place on record our sincere gratitude to the leadership of Indian Society of Criminology for their constant encouragement and support for this initiative, particularly Dr. N.K. Chakrabarti, President ISC, Dr. Madhava Somasundaram, Chairperson ISC, and Dr. M.D. Alan Selvakumar, Secretary ISC, and all other office bearers of the Society, whose guidance and trust have made this lecture series possible. I sincerely thank our speaker, Dr. Mitzie Forrest, for accepting our request to be part of this series. Dr. Mitzie Forrest is an assistant professor of criminal justice and criminology at Campbellsville University, USA. She holds a PhD in criminal justice at Liberty University, where her dissertation explored law enforcement officers' lived experiences of occupational stress, job satisfaction, and identity construction within contemporary socio-political climates. Her research interests include law enforcement wellness, leadership culture, organizational resilience, and the evolution of justice systems across cultures. Dr. Forrest has also professional field experience as a corrections officer, transit authority officer, armed security officer, and as an intelligence or crime analyst. She has served as a consultant on recidivism for non-profit organization on inmate reentry programs and for a legal firm investigating the construction of new healthcare facility and the environmental crime prevention strategies necessary to ensure employee and patient safety in the geographic area. Her teaching philosophy integrates experiential and learning and comparative and cultural criminology and the ethical dimensions of justice to prepare students for both local and global service. With that, I once again thank you all for joining with us today. I also kindly request all participants to mark their attendance by filling out the Google form shared in the chat box to facilitate the issuance of certificates. I now invite Dr. Mitzie Forrest to take the session forward. Over to you, Dr. Forrest.
Good morning or good evening to all of my Indian colleagues and all of the undergrad and graduate students I'm speaking with today. I am going to attempt to share my PowerPoint screen right now, and I want to thank you for such an outstanding introduction. I am deeply humbled and very grateful that I've been included in this today. Can everyone see my shared screen?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. I want to get started right away so that we can end on time. I don't want to keep you any longer than is absolutely necessary. And because I am lecturing undergrad who may be new to this profession, as well as those who are very knowledgeable and professors themselves, I am starting out very basic. And toward the end of the presentation, I want to show about an 8-minute video, and we will move forward from there. But basically today, we're going to talk about why people commit crime, the foundations and real-world application of criminological thinking. Today's agenda overview is our criminological perspective on crime as professionals and training professionals, future professionals to be. How interdisciplinary the foundations of criminological thinking actually are and how they cross into several different disciplines within education and everyday practice. We're going to ponder for a while about theory in practice, our everyday explanations along with formalized theories we know of, And then we're going to look at cross-cultural perspectives on crime. We'll do a small case study, very simple one to analyze, real-world crime. And then we will come back to the central question and the role of criminology in our studies and real-world application. First of all, to understand the core question about criminology, we focus on why do some people commit crimes? Why do others not? And what are the differences? This actually forms the foundation for why all of us have found interest in studying criminology. There are many disciplinary connections that go across disciplines. Criminology is actually a subcategory of sociology, but it also involves psychology, victimology, and other fields to provide us a holistic and organic understanding of why crime occurs in every culture and society. We can learn to apply criminological theories through case studies and practical examples in real-world contexts, no matter where we live, no matter if we're in a rural area, an urban area, or a suburban area. And then we need to also remember that our culture is not the only culture that influences crime. Crime is an international issue, and culture shapes what we define as crime. And yet, at the very basis of criminological studies, the questions remain universal, no matter what our societal background is. Again, that core question, why do people commit crimes? And stakeholders across the justice systems want to know why. We start with police, who are in charge of enforcing laws set forth by a society. We have analysts who wonder why specific crimes take place specific times of day, certain areas. Why do they draw certain kind of criminals into certain kinds of areas? Judges, solicitors, and barristers, even victims want to know, why do people commit these crimes? In order to approach as a systems-based criminological approach, we have to use what we call evidence-based practice, where we're looking for systematic, science-based explanation instead of relying on intuitive judgments or blame on individuals, society, and institutions. We have to look farther than that to answer the why. Now, the purpose of why all of us are here, why we're interested in criminology, and quite frankly, it's one of the favorite things that I do, is criminological background and teachings and all of the things that can be pulled into it. It's to help those who are out there enforcing and adjudicating the laws of any great nation, to help them prevent crime, prevent victimhood, and enhance the criminal justice decision-making processes through informed explanations rather than hit and miss types of methods of addressing issues. So today, I would like for you to be encouraged to reflect on initial intuitive explanations that people give when hearing about crimes. Like, for instance, some of the very first explanations that people will give about crime is, well, they hung out with a certain group of people, or the family they were raised by, the biological connection has a history of crime, or they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They just made a really wrong decision. The fact remains, we can go deeper than that. We don't have to use our gut instincts and our intuition alone. We can give those thoughts actual scientific names through theoretical approaches to criminology. Now, we've already talked about how interdisciplinary foundations all come together for this. And in order to put theory application into practice, we have to analyze and do the cross-cultural perspective on crime. As a society, we look to our own social structures, our institutions. Do we have inequality which exists? And what are our community influences on criminal behavior? And while I have not had the great pleasure of being to India yet, I can tell you that I have been all over Western Europe, and the crime there looks very much like that which we see in America, with just a few different cultural contexts that influence it. For instance, there are strict gun control laws in Great Britain. Therefore, fewer gun crimes happen there than in America, where gun control has been a core issue at the political and the social level for many, many decades. Well, in London, they tend to have more knife attacks as opposed to gunshot victims. You go to New York City, you may get some knife attacks, but you will also get the gunshots and various other means of committing crimes that cause harm to people. Now, by far and large, I did not notice huge gaps in property crimes. While on the trains in Germany and in the UK, I noticed that there were graffiti, which is property crime. I noticed that there were gang tags and markings, again, property crime. So many of those types of things, when you look to broken windows theory and degradation of property, people who can't keep their property up and it fails over time and attracts the criminal activity. Some of those things are very much the same. But again, for instance, gun crimes in America versus stabbing and knifing crimes in the UK are a little bit different. And that depends on government laws and bans. That is how we are sociologically structured when you get down to the roots of that. Now, inequality. I also have yet to go to any country where there are what we have that we call in America the haves and the have nots, meaning the more elite and the rich versus the poor. It seems that in every society, no matter how equal we try to be, there are always the rich, the middle class, and the poor. Oftentimes, we want to blame the poor for committing all the crime, when here in America, I can tell you that there are many white collar crimes that the elite carry out. It's just that their sentencing structures, the way they commit their crimes, their educational backgrounds, and their sociological backgrounds are different. So are their psychological factors for why they commit the crime. Possibly it's greed or hedonism versus a true need, where a poor person on the street in San Francisco may steal food from a grocery store just to feed their family. So the reasons behind the crimes are different, the motivations may be different, but it exists in all countries. We also want to look at the victimological study and perspective about how victimology and victim relationships affect the victim and offender relationships and crime acts. Is it exposure, being out after dark? I tell all of my undergrad and graduate students, in America at least, good things don't happen after dark. And I saw the same thing in Western Europe. Um, Businesses tend to shutter their windows after dark. Things get a little riskier in the cloak of darkness. So, if I'm a victim and I work a night job, I might want to take extra precautions on my own behalf to not be a victim of crime. And then, of course, we get to the psychological, the biological perspectives. Impulsivity, self-control. Do I use illegal or illicit substances that influence my thinking and decision-making process? Do I have a mental disease or defect that puts me at risk, greater risk for being a criminal or a victim? And all of these approaches come together to form the beginning of why We need to really put criminal justice professionals out in the world who have a thorough understanding of criminology and how we assess criminals and their victims. And it is so important to remember that none of these disciplines all alone, standing by themselves, will ever represent the intersection of crime and societal norms and mores and what is acceptable. We have to look at all of them. Now, the intersection of multiple disciplines. It truly just means, where does criminology come together with sociology, psychology, biology, and victimology to organically and holistically explain crime? Theoretical criminological principles are applied by practitioners every day in investigations, sentencing in the courts, and even profiling, trying to figure out who a criminal might be. And analysts such as myself, when I work for a police department, why are these crimes happening in this location at this time of day, this day of week? And why are there multiple offenders that are being identified as doing it? And then we always have to consider that cross-cultural variance, culture, context. And while the definitions of specific crimes may vary by country and across the globe, we're still looking for the same explanation, and that is to answer the question why. And why is never an easy answer. It covers more than just one area, as previously discussed. And in order to do a really great case study, we have to apply all of these cross disciplines and how they influence crime to do a thorough investigation and to answer the question of why. Now, foundation of the criminological question of why do people commit crime? We have to move through several different stages, as I previously mentioned. Let's look at all of it. Let's look at theory versus everyday explanations. And one of those things I previously mentioned is practitioners out there on the streets. For instance, the police there around the University of Madras, they use everyday language. Theoretical crime explanations give us the formal terms. Here in America, we have this saying that is very cliched and taken for granted. My grandmother used to say it. Just remember, Mitzie, birds of a feather flock together. And what my grandmother meant was, be careful who you associate with, because you will come to be known for those people. And if I hang out with juvenile status offenders, young criminals, I might be known as one of them, whether I'm actually committing the crimes or not as a juvenile. So she encouraged me, as did my parents, to hang out with people who weren't juvenile status offenders or members of juvenile gangs, and to hang out with the perceived societally normalized and acceptable good people, those that met the norms of our society, those who didn't lie or steal. And there is another saying, and I'm sure you have some much like it in India, we are known by the company we keep. It's the same thing as the rhyme of birds of a feather flock together. This can all be explained by differential association theory, a formalized criminological theory. And some of the examples I give in my class, well, Bobby got caught up in juvenile detention because he was caught with a can of spray paint and he was vandalizing city property. 6 others were arrested as well. They were all teenagers. Then we get into, well, how did they have the time to be out committing these offenses? We can look to routine activities theory for that one. After school here in America, we are notorious for not having structured after school times. We send our children home, both parents are working, and they're unsupervised, sometimes for 3 to 4 hours. That lends itself, due to the unstructured time, to children falling into potentially criminal behaviors. Routine activities theory can be used to explain that. Now, back to my own childhood, my parents and grandparents told me I needed to hang out with kids that did not do criminal things. That's a social control theory application. I'm known by the company I keep. I want to fit into the greater society that follows the rules. That is social control. And then rational choice. Often that is explained whenever there are crimes of opportunity. Well, the wallet was in front of me. It fell out of the man's pocket. It had a lot of money in it. I chose to take it. The benefit of taking the money seemed better than the possible punishment that could happen as a result if I got caught. It was rational choice. The benefits outweighed the possible punishment. Now, in my own classes at the university, I have always tried to give scenarios where we can analyze all of the perspectives that we can get to in any 1 hour time frame and have a crime case to study. And we will actually do one of those today. We also need to be very mindful about crime definitions across cultures. For instance, in Germany, it is broadly accepted that people under the age of 18, due to the culture, may drink beer and wine. Germany is known for its beer and wine. However, when you come to America, and I have several German students right now, we have to tell them you're not allowed to drink in America unless you're over the age of 21. It gets even more complicated over here, and it may very well between different provinces and states in India as well. Perhaps Bengal has different standards than another state in India. Well, here in Kentucky, it's the age of 21. In some states, it may only be 18. And there's a lot of political debate in America as well, because at 18, you can enlist in the nation's defense and military organizations, but you cannot drink until you're 21 in most states. And with 50 different states and US territories, it can be very confusing moving between states as to what is acceptable in one state, what isn't in another. Those legal variations often cause a lot of disruption, but it also reflects on the differing cultural and legal perspective in each region or area. And like I said, that probably exists where you live too. But at the end of the day, whether you're in Madras at the university or if you're in central Kentucky at a very small international populated university, that basic crime concern is the same. Despite any differences we may have as societies, how can we universally seek to explain and prevent certain behaviors that are considered criminal? And how can we help law enforcement and the judicial systems prevent these crimes from actually happening? And that's where you as professionals and future professionals actually come in. It's why I get so excited about teaching. I can see the minds growing and the curiosity deepening every class, and I love that. Again, cultural norms. What is expected in your culture? Do people live up to those norms? What are the expectations of your family, of your society? And then the universal crime prevention. And I like to say here, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. That is an old saying that has been said for many centuries. In other words, hopefully, before we go to an area, we know what is acceptable. And so we do as the law-abiding citizens in that area do. For instance, here in America, my students are always surprised to learn that there are beaches in Germany where the bathers bathe nude. In America, you have to go to specially designated compounds where all people do that within that compound. But it's illegal if you're in public areas. You cannot do that. In Germany, It's not considered anything other than cultural. It's what they do. If you go up to the Baltic in June, there will be nude bathing. Nothing is done about that. It is not a crime. If you go to Long Island, New York, to the beach on Fire Island, you will likely be arrested for doing the exact same thing because the cultures, the expectations do vary. So I think it's very important when we travel, whether I'm in India and I should do as my Indian colleagues do, or if we're in America and traveling state to state, we should do as those states' law-abiding citizens do. Now we're going to ponder the case study. It's a very simple one, but it is one that you can apply almost all of the different types of criminological theories to. A young adult, we're going to say a young man who's 20 to 22 years old, commits an armed robbery due to a job loss. He has financial hardship and peer pressure. Also, he has a young family at home, a wife and a baby. Now, there are going to be influencing factors as to why he committed this crime. They're going to be structural through society, psychological for him as an individual, what we call the micro level, the individual level. Was an opportunity present? And who was his victim? Who did he rob with a gun or a weapon? Because it was an armed robbery. And then we're going to do an analysis that links those case factors to established criminological theories for a deeper understanding of why he might have done this. If we were to map his responses to criminological theories under structural, we might look at the societal structures. We're going to be sociologists for a brief moment. We know that in order to purchase what we need or want, like clothing and food, we must have money. But the robber had lost his job. Therefore, he had no money. Then we're going to look at him as an individual. He was under strain. The strain theory explains this. He lost his job. He was under a great deal of stress. He had a young family at home he had to provide for. He felt shame. He was the primary wage earner for this family, and he committed that armed robbery to continue making provisions for his family at home. Now, let's look at the victimological approach to this. There was an opportunity. He perceived that there was a vulnerable victim. And in this case, it was a convenience store. It was dark. The convenience store owner was alone, manning their store. So there was a motivated offender. He was under stress and strain. He needed to provide for his family. There was a vulnerable victim. No one else was in the store, and the cash drawer was full. There's your target. And at the time of the armed robbery, there were no officers around, there were no CCTVs, and the store owner had no weapons with which to fight back. He was a vulnerable victim, and there was an absence of a guardian present. So the robbery was actually able to be carried out successfully by the offender. We can tie all of this to routine activity theory, which we sometimes shorten to RAT over here. I prefer to say it out, the entire phrase. And then the victim-related factors. How do we map this to the crime? What made this victim special? He was alone. He was vulnerable. And again, he was a great target. So in the future, to prevent that crime, we may want to have more than one person stationed at that store. We may want to have bars on the windows. We may want to lock certain doors after certain hours. And we may want to have cameras everywhere and keep the cash count in the drawer to a minimum and post that after 8 p.m., there's no more than 150 American dollars in that drawer. That's not a huge takeaway to commit an armed robbery in this country. Although I will say that there have been armed robberies for much less than that. So if you're a new student to criminology, just start thinking this way. Think about all of the different reasons why a crime may play itself out. Now, again, we're always looking for why did this crime happen? But ultimately, as I said before, we want to be able to prevent crime by understanding its causes rather than just punishing the criminals who commit them. And this is why, at least in this country. So I'm doing a little bit of sharing of comparative criminology with you today. In this country, we are the most incarcerated country in the Western world. At current, we have about 2.5 million men and women incarcerated in prisons and jails across this country. That is an astounding rate that we have chosen to punish rather than prevent them from doing the crimes. That does not include the tens of thousands of people who are in community corrections under the authority of a probation and parole board in this country. So by the time you count up the millions with the 10 of thousands, it's actually a shame-based kind of a statistic for me as an American, because I believe that if we have more scientific and evidence-based approaches, we might be able to head some of this off at the pass, and that possibly incarceration is a last resort. Unfortunately, historically, and some of you may have heard about laws such as the 3 strikes and you're out law, which exists in California. That law was put into practice by politicians who had no background in criminological evidence-based research in response to the elite fearing for crime. They were at a high crime rate back in the 80s out on the West Coast of America. So all of the elite that had all of the political influence insisted we must get tough on crime. 3 strikes and you're out was born. As a result of the legislators enacting these laws out in California, California is still suffering today from a much overcrowded prison system, and some of those people who are in prison were minor offenders because 3 strikes did not discriminate. If you were a small-time drug user of illegal substances, if you got caught, indicted, and found guilty 3 times, you went to a state penitentiary. If you were a high-level 3-time murderer with convictions, you went to a state penitentiary. So there was no discriminating between crimes that could have been rehabilitated, such as the drug user potentially, versus the murderer who did deserve to spend the rest of their life in prison. And as a result, California is still paying the price for that today, and so are the taxpayers. No evidence-based criminological explanation of those crimes were ever sought out. And now they're having to take a step back at great cost decades later. It's been 40 years. And they're trying to assess the overall damages and what it's going to take to get out of that. If they had hired one of you, they wouldn't be having these problems because we would have been able to share our education and our evidence-based based approaches with them, and we could have found the real cause of the crime, which is going to oftentimes go back to, unfortunately, poverty and need and lack of resources. But evidence-based practice right now in America, EBP, is a huge buzzword among criminologists. And I hope it is in India as well. Now, empirical research. Many of you are undergrads and graduates. Many of you are already PhDs, or you're working on your dissertations right now. Your research and future research is critical to how criminologists are perceived across the world in the future. This is where you guys get to impact all of the future of crime, criminals, crime prevention. Let's help our boots on the ground, our police officers. Let's start at the most basic. Let's help them figure out how to apply science to understanding and preventing crime rather than just focusing on punishment and prison. It's a huge responsibility, and I applaud all of you for having the same curiosity as those of us who are already in the profession have. I can't say that enough. I love to see students in my classroom that are curious and they want to know more. I'm excited for you and your future. Now, on the next slide, and I realize many of the slides are highly repetitive, and it's because I'm driving home a point. It is interdisciplinary. As a criminologist, you have to look at all of the disciplines, the sociology, the psychology, the victimology, all of the theory and application. It really makes a difference. Recognize that no matter where you live or where you may go, there are cultural considerations that must be taken into account to accurately interpret the crime causes and develop the effective prevention strategies and methods for you as a criminologist. And then the EBP, the evidence-based prevention. You will have studied hard. You will have done thorough research. You will have dug deeper and deeper and deeper until you have created a safer and more just society. And I hope that curiosity never, ever leaves you. Now, on the next slide, and I know that we are 30 minutes into the presentation by my clock counter. This is going to be about 8 minutes to 10 minutes long, but it's very important, and I hope that the accent is easy to understand. We are not taught proper King's English in our country, and unfortunately, there are a lot of different regional differences and accents. So I apologize if he talks too fast. But Chief Joe Sullivan is the chief of police in Wichita, Kansas. This is just a few years ago. And this is how you can be a future crime analyst or police officer who employs risk terrain modeling because you've done your homework and your evidence-based research as a criminologist. Bear with me for just a moment.
Hello, am I audible? Hello,
Yes, you
ma'am, am
are.
I? Yeah, I think the audio is not audible. Like, I'm not able to hear it.
Ma'am, audio is not working, ma'am.
Um, Excuse me, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am? Ma'am, we are not able to listen to the audio from the video. Would it be all right if you could share the link of the video in the chat box?
Yes, so you cannot hear the audio. Let me pull that up for you. And it's unfortunate. I don't know what's going on with that. Hang on just a moment. Can everyone see that now in the chat box?
Yes, ma'am. We're able to see the YouTube link. Thank you.
Okay, I will move on from the video then, and I am sorry I did not have my chat up to see that the video is not audible. I can hear everything on my end. I'll give you a brief breakdown on that. Basically, what it is risk terrain modeling is a type of environmental crime prevention through a criminological lens. And what the chief of the Wichita Police Department did was he had all of his analysts come in to form a unified crime prevention tactic, which involved looking at multiple layers on their geomapping software. They found that within a 300 to 400 feet distance, there were motels that had convenience stores located very near them. We know here that if there is a motel or a hotel, the travelers are transient, they often travel with money, and they don't have food sources or drinks readily available to them. So they will often walk across the street, the 300 feet or so, to those convenience stores, which were being held up. So they employed actual forces with their police department to these areas rather than putting patrols all over the city just doing random patrols. They found that 2% of the city's areas were causing more than half of the crime of robbery in that particular district of his policing jurisdiction. So, risk terrain modeling, because criminological perspectives and analysts were actually utilizing evidence-based practice, were able to more appropriately allocate police resources, men and women in uniform, to those areas, rather than just driving around randomly and hoping they found a crime they could prevent. And we all know it's not a crime until it actually takes place, right? So crime prevention, what they saw is that the robbery rates came down substantially in those areas. And it was such a success, they started employing it for other crime types within that city and under that chief's direction. Now, let me see if I can.
Terribly sorry to interrupt, ma'am, but I believe the presentation is not visible to us. So could you please share the presentation, please?
Yes, I'm getting right back to that. Can you see that now?
I'm afraid not, ma'am.
All right, can you see this?
No, ma'am,
Mm,
still the
no,
same.
ma'am.
Still the same. Let's see
It's
if I
still the
can.
same.
We're going to try this again. I promise we're going to get you back on there.
Meanwhile, I have a doubt here.
What
My
about
chat feature,
now?
A
Yes,
chat
ma'am.
feature
Yes,
Yes,
is
it is
it is
visible.
disabled.
visible now. It is visible now, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I am sorry about that. I love the fact that we can use Teams to be able to see one another across time and distance, but sometimes tech becomes a problem. So my apologies for that. Let me go back the one slide. I am sorry about the audio on that, but I promise you, if you take the link and watch it, you will see that you can have a huge impact in your work just by studying very, very hard to be a criminologist. Without criminological thinkers, we would truly, in the criminal justice disciplines, be at a loss. And I am very thankful that I had the possibility and the opportunity to actually be an analyst. I can tell you that that job probably taught me more than some of my educational classes did, because I was actually grounded in the practical application of criminology that I studied so many years for. I am going to go to the next slide. It will give you my contact information, and then I'm going to stop sharing and come back on camera so that I can see everyone's beautiful faces and recognize who my colleagues are there in India. So you can either take a screenshot or capture a photograph with your phone. If you would like to read my dissertation work, that is what the QR code is for. I do have WhatsApp and I do text. My students love that. I can answer texts, and I will also answer your emails at my Gmail account there if you would like to contact me. And this will be available, I'm sure, through the Indian Society of Criminology, should you want it and you're not able to get it today. But right now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to come back on camera with each of you. And I will ask my colleagues there at the society, how would you like to handle the question and answer time? I will give it to you to moderate.
Good
So
evening,
thank you
ma'am.
very much,
Good morning.
Dr. Forrest, for that
Thank you for
extremely
having
insightful and
me.
thought-provoking lecture. So on behalf of the Indian Society of Criminology, I sincerely thank you for sharing your time, scholarship, and valuable perspectives with us today. We will now open the floor for a brief interaction. If there are any questions or reflections from the participants, you may kindly raise them or post your questions in the chat box. We will try to take in as many questions as time permits.
Okay. And I know today's presentation was very basic, but I also knew that I had an audience from undergraduate up to those who have already completed PhDs and begun their research, and some who have been even in the field much longer than I. If I should be invited back at any time, I would love to do a deep dive environmental crime prevention lecture with you that involves risk terrain management. Okay, so we have a question here from, and I may mispronounce your name, Akshat Dubey. I hope I got that correct. Why criminal main intention to doing the crime? And I got the pronunciation close at least. We study the criminal frequently to try to get in their heads and in their backgrounds to figure out why they are doing it. For instance, there are some twin studies out there of identical twins. They were separated at birth. One went to a family, another twin, identical DNA, goes to a different family. One twin ends up committing crimes, same DNA. The other twin does not commit crimes, same DNA. So we know at that point, or at least can start digging through the research. If they're identical DNA, then biology cannot be the only explanation of why this person commits crime. Perhaps it's that structural, societal, the environmental factors. This is why in my intro to criminology class, on the very first day, I will ask students, what does a criminal look like? Immediately, they start describing darkness, hoods, the dark figure of crime. When I stop them, I say, actually, a criminal looks just like you and me. We can be criminals. So if these two twins with the exact DNA have one that commits crime and one that doesn't, then how do we explain it? We have to start looking at their childhood. Were there any adverse childhood events? We call those ACEs, adverse childhood events. Could that have possibly influenced them? Were there other sorts of traumas? Did they hang out with the wrong people? And by wrong, I mean criminally intended types of people. What made this person? Or were they psychologically impaired, or did they have a mental dysfunction or disorder? Did they have no impulse control? Did they have psychological issues that prevented them from having a great deal of self-control? Were they sociopaths? Were they psychopaths? We have to look at all of it. So that is why we like to study the criminal. Now, I also teach victimology, and without victim blaming, I try to make that a tantamount purpose. Do not victim blame. But we have also found that from a victimological side, that there are some of us who present more victim worthy than others. So we study the criminal a lot, but at least here in America, we're also introducing the concept of what part victims may play to appear as vulnerable. So the next question, what role does stigma play in labeling theory? Let me tell you, we talk about that one and go into depth. It can play a huge role. For instance, if you're a child and all you've ever heard was that you're a bad child, you're going to go to jail if you keep doing the things you're doing. Sometimes there is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. That child feels labeled as negative, and they do negative things as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that can play a huge, huge part in how we look at adverse events of childhood. How were they labeled? Alternatively, I point out to my students frequently in classes, if we give our children positive labels, oftentimes they'll live up in the self-fulfilling prophecy to those positive labels. Oh, and I'm going to probably get a name incorrect, but Harita, you're such a smart person. I see a great future for you. You're going to do wonderful things in your studies. You are going to be the best criminologist ever. Those types of labels can also impact us. Now, where we get left or right of how labeling works, sometimes we can feed all negative and that person will still end up with a positive non-criminal life. Sometimes we can label with all positive reinforcement. That person does end up being a criminal. So we have to look at each case individually and thoroughly. Now, let's go over here again. Let me see which questions. All right, second year law student recently. My subjects were BNS, BNSS, love criminology, made me more interested than I've done my job today. I thank you for that. That actually inspires me as a teacher. Waiting to attend more sessions. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Now, neurocriminology is still unreliable, and does that field of study have hopes to contribute? Absolutely. Right now, I have a German student who is applying for her master's at different universities here in the US. John Jay College is in New York, and she is going to study forensic criminology. Now, forensic or neurological criminology, and they're very, very close to one another. Forensics does actually study how law is applied to criminology. On the neuro side of criminology, we do have to look and rely on forensic criminology. They often go hand in hand, because what if you have a defendant that says, well, I am innocent, but I was insane? How do you prove insanity? And with the neurological approach too, does this person have a disorder that made them incapable of not committing that crime? And should they still be accountable? Well, by far and large, at least here in America, if you kill someone, for instance, even if you're neurologically or psychologically or psychiatrically at a deficit, you still have to be accountable for the fact that you killed them. But where you're institutionalized is completely different. Rather than sending you to prison, we may send you to a lockdown mental health facility where that condition is actually treated. So neurocriminology absolutely has a place in the criminological field. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Anissa, Fatima. Thank you so much. Criminology-based methods to identify the tendency to commit crimes in individuals. We often get into some of the psychological approaches on that with a criminological basis. For instance, we have extensive studies here, and I know you do too in India, because I've pulled many of those studies and used them as reference points, about children in neighborhoods, the haves and the have-nots, the elite again versus those who are lacking socioeconomic resources, access to education, healthy food. So if we look at a needs-based reason for committing crime and how it might start in youth, we can start predicting probabilities of who may or may not be more subject to commit crimes. And that is cross-cultural. If you go to some of the most impoverished areas in your local area and you see the kids, you will start noticing patterns that puts them at risk for future criminality. So you just start looking at those methods. Is there enough education? Are there structured activities to keep them out of juvenile crime? What kind of crimes are being committed in that area? And what is the base cause for that? Is it poverty? Is it the fact that there are gangs there that are influencing the kids? Where are the parents? Are the parents committing to these children the time they need and giving them the guidance they need? And believe me, we have all of these problems here in America. Don't let all of the pop culture and the social media fool you. We have our problems. And you can use any of the theoretical explanations and start digging deeper into them and apply them to any potential and probability, predictability for future crimes to be committed. Question is based on gender-based crimes and hate crimes. A lot of crimes of this nature occurs due to societal and structural inequalities. Totally agree on that. This particular group is beneath me. It's still prevalent here too. How do we undo this entire train of thought so that people committing hate crimes and gender-based crimes learn at the very least not to hurt fellow humans? Well, that is the million-dollar question. If we could wipe out hate in this world, wouldn't that be a utopia that we could all just thrive in? Unfortunately, we have been at this since the creation of mankind walking on this planet, and there have been those who commit crime and those who don't. I don't think it can be totally obliterated, but, and this is a little bit of former law enforcement sarcasm, But as long as there is somebody committing crime, we will always be able to be the scientists who are digging deeper to try to find out why they did. Is prevention 100% possible? I don't think so. However, I think that if we as individual scientists move forward and do the best we can and can just influence, if it's just one person in our entire lives to not commit a crime and to live a better legacy or to change a legacy for a family, then we have made an impact that is worthy of all of the education that we are getting and all the time we've spent in our scientifically based books. Now, I think that, all sarcasm aside, one of the things that working in prison taught me, and maybe more people need this kind of experience, I was assigned to the sex offender units and the gangs units. I think whenever I recognized that every one of those men on the sex offender unit and on my gangs unit were someone's children, and I treated them as humans first. Now, mind you, it was not a pleasant environment. I'm not saying I was kind all the time. You can't be kind. They will take advantage of you. But I did recognize the fact that they were someone's child. They were human. But recidivism is hard to overcome. And if any of them got out, I am pretty sure that recidivism may have ruled some of their lives and they learned nothing from the experience, unfortunately. That is a hard question, and truly, if we ever find the answer to that, we will have a perfect society. And thank you, Kirthana. Some psychological factors can contribute for a person to commit a crime. Now, what common psychological effects does a person have after they realize they have committed a crime? Well, it depends on large part, are they a sociopath or a psychopath? Which is rare, by the way. Only about 2% of the general population actually qualifies for either of those. Most people, especially if they don't have some sort of a mental block or disorder, do understand at some point what they have done to the other person. Unfortunately, especially with some inner city youth crime, not too far from where I'm at in my home this morning, maybe an hour away in Louisville, there are teens that are just gunning down other teenagers. And somewhere along the way, whether it was in the home or in other harsh environments they were brought up in poverty, without access to resources, they did not learn this thing called empathy. So it depends on the individual and their own psychological state. Now, if I hurt someone, I have that compassion and empathy. I would feel horrible. But I can tell you that not all people, even those I encountered in prison, have that same ability. So that's where forensic psychologists and criminologists come in, and we really, really need to help bring them along too, because some people just don't have that in them. They don't have that conscience. All right, so what is the best approach to go for rehabilitation or imprisonment? Which is better to reduce the crime rate and the criminals? That depends on a lot of things. What is the age and the mental capabilities of the offender? What is the crime? Here in America, and we are based on English common law, the worse the crime, societally speaking, the more harsh the punishment. For instance, you commit a premeditated murder, that's what you intended to do, you plotted for it, you planned for it, you're going to prison. If all of the evidence is present and there is no doubt that you did it, you will go to prison. Now, there may be some rehabilitative factors in the prison that will help you do it should you ever get out, but you're going to do your imprisonment time. Now, in the case of rehabilitation, I often think about our juvenile status offenders over here. And by status offenses, I mean vandalism, minor crimes, typically property crimes, not people crimes. And we try to rehabilitate them. We try to get them into anger management or educate them on why these things aren't societally appropriate. in case their parents missed that cue and did not do that. So I think it depends on age and crime type. Certainly, we don't want serial rapists or murderers walking around the streets, but if you have a 10-year-old that spray painted your garage, we may want to give him a rehabilitative chance. Unfortunately, once children enter the justice system here in this country, many of them do end up in the adult systems. And that is unfortunate. And I will tell you that is a cultural implication that is solely based on American lifestyles of this day, where there are not two parents in the home and divorce is frequent. Over 60% of marriages end in divorce in this country, and that is not a good thing. And children often have one-parent homes. So juvenile crime is up, and unfortunately, many of those do end up in prison. Effective strategies to help juveniles reintegrate into society, preventing stigma, retaliation, or reoffending. That's a hard one. The stigma is always difficult. If peers know that you've been in a facility, that goes back to labeling theory. It's hard to overcome sometimes. It just depends again on what that crime is. Typically in a juvenile facility here, we have anger management, different classes. We try, if they're at a learning deficit due to the environment they came out of, we try to get their educations up to where they should be. Oftentimes we find that they are either the bullies or were the bullied victims. Maybe they can't read, maybe they don't feel competent. So we do a lot of work with our youth over here to build self-esteem and to get psychological assessment if it looks like depression, anxiety, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and those things are at play. So if you want to be rehabbed and you're a youth crime, typically we do try to work with you over here and get you into a better place so that you can go back out and hopefully rejoin society. Let's see. And I'll have to ask my hosts, where are we on time? Stricter punishments, are they effective in reducing crime rates? Ananya. What we have found here in this country is no, they're not. As I'm sure you hear in the news, America and many of our 50 states still have a death penalty. A death penalty is a deterrent in committing murder, or that's what it was put in place for. Unfortunately, we still have murders that occur, even though the offenders know that the death penalty is in place. So to some degree, that is not what a criminal is thinking about. Often with murders, they are heat of passion, unplanned, but nevertheless carried out. They are not thinking about, oh, I may have to sit in the electric chair if I do this. And impulsivity and self-control tends to be a big thing per offender as well. So oftentimes the more punitive a punishment is, on some crimes, it has no effect at all. The people still commit the crimes. So I would have to say no on that. Stricter punishments often do not work in reducing crime rates, and we can look to California for that one for sure. Okay, how will AI help in the future in decoding crime, criminals, and criminology? Mr. Kumar, law graduate. Well, AI is going to have to get better before it can predictably and accurately do any of the above. And here is why I say that. AI is only as good as the millions of people who contribute to it, and all it takes is one wrong algorithm to be inserted into that. It's why if my students think that they're going to write their papers with AI, they won't get caught. But as I read the papers, I find things that are just totally not correct. and it is those algorithms that have been contributed by various humans. So we humans are only as good as that AI allows us to be, which is also invented by humans. And we know that is not perfect. So I think what will happen over time is that we will still continue to use our predictive policing tools like that risk terrain modeling, where we take previous crime statistics and crime acts, incidents of crime, and we put those into our computers and generate algorithms based off of those facts. And we have already proven that we can do predictive policing with those algorithms based on past crimes. Where AI is going to be 10 years hence, 40 years hence, I don't know. I think it will get better because historically technology has gotten better. The first computers were the size of buildings. So now we can put them into our briefcase and carry them on an airplane. So no doubt it will get better. Let's see. What if there was a kingpin of international criminal enterprises and acts who had some sense of morality? Will he be able to improve the world to some extent? In Britain, there is a fable about a man named Robin Hood. He robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. And we actually do see that with some criminals. And while they are still committing crimes, they may very well take some of their ill-gotten gains and give to those who need it. And so he does, or she does, improve the world for some of those people to some extent. But as a criminologist, what does that society say about robbing, stealing, murdering, or whatever this kingpin did to get to that point where he was able to improve the world without legitimacy, without going through the things that normal law-abiding citizens do? And at the base, and this is a personal opinion, he's still a criminal. We need to do things above board and according to the laws of our society. Thank you, Sunanda. Thank you, Dayal Singh, doctor. Well, a person repeatedly commits crime after release from prison. What practical rehabilitation measures would you suggest? Well, he had rehabilitation most likely in our prisons over here, or a chance at rehabilitating. If he has just been released or she has just been released, there is a very good chance they're going to go back in and they're going to be reevaluated. Recidivating immediately after is not a good sign of self-control, impulse control, and we need to do a start over. If they're already out on probation, their probation officer might put them in a different class. We offer classes regularly as a part of our probation in this country. Like if it were a drug offense and they were arrested for that, they might be sent to an inpatient rehabilitative clinic. It just depends on the crime and how soon after release, and if the crime was heinous. Was it a crime against society or was it a crime against a person? So we have to evaluate very much on an individual basis. Crime, it's all focused on middle class or working class people. What about the crime committed by the elite class who are in power and influential people? They frame what is right and what is wrong, and they do by large influence our political systems, no matter what country we're in. I will agree with that. Universal problem faced by us. If a person stealing from a shop for achieving his day-to-day needs, he's got punishment, whereas the greedy man can scam large sums and amounts, not even attending court proceedings. That is the power of money. We talk about this all the time in my classes. And for instance, in this country, if you are a young male and non-white, you have a greater chance of being incarcerated for a more minor crime than your white male counterpart. And it is access to means and money. What we try to do in this country, sometimes with success and sometimes not, is have a public defender available. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. However, again, money plays a part in that. Our public defenders are so overburdened, and the caseloads they carry means that that person, the one who needs the attention the most, may not get it and may still end up being incarcerated or plea bargain on a deal that still puts them in a prison. This is not an uncommon problem, and Americans tend to forget this. And with having so many international students in my classes, I know that coming to America may be a dream for them, and I want my international students to come because it teaches the American students that often they feel entitled to an education that they're not actually earning. And my international students tend to work much harder than American students. But that with money comes privilege. And I haven't been in a society yet that doesn't have that going. And that is another one of those utopia questions that if we could solve that problem, we would be able to solve the world's problems. Like I said, if you're a non-white young male in this country and you have the equally aged, equal crime committed by a white counterpart, that white counterpart, even though they may not be elite, they may not have a lot of money, they may still be able to access better defense mechanisms than the non-white minority. And I think that's where equal justice for all and criminologists, we play a huge part in exposing some of that by teaching it in our classrooms so that you as students and as professors and scholars can go out and educate the rest of the world on it. Because in our day-to-day lives, we don't think about those things. So I see it as my job to educate about racial and minority justice and how it should be equal for all and how we can bring attention to that. Attention is where it starts. Education and knowledge. That can be our weapon in fighting the unfair justice systems in the world. Right. Risk terrain modeling developed in relatively formalized urban contexts in the West. How theoretically and methodologically transferable is that to Indian cities characterized by informality, fluid spatial structures, underreporting, and embedded social hierarchies? That is a deep question. Would applying RTM here risk reproducing Western criminological assumptions without accounting for Indian sociocultural dynamics? Hopefully not if I were the one employing it. If you went to a police chief that had never been outside of the United States and he wanted to come over there or she wanted to come over there and employ it, they would probably want to do that within limited social context and knowledge. And that is a huge risk. So what I would want to do if I were the one coming over and saying, look, this is worked over there. Let's see what your city or your town looks like. Let's, as criminologists, study the people who commit the crimes. Let's study the crime types. Let's look at where they're happening. And the only way to do that is to dig deep into the reports. Now, with the social hierarchies, and many police world over distrust scientists. They don't want us in their reports and their archived paperwork. But if it is a police department that is forward thinking and progressive, they tend to welcome us in and say, here is everything. Tell me what I can do to help my people who pay my wages through taxes to keep them safer. And I do believe that risk terrain modeling is adaptable to society, the fluid spatial structures, and the social hierarchies anywhere you go. But I think it's important that the people who are a part of that society play critical roles with minimal Western influence or influence from anyone else in the world. I think you have to own it. Now, can someone who's already using it from a Western country help get you started down that road? Absolutely. We learn from one another. In fact, I need to get to India because I know you can teach me things that I never knew. But yes, I do think with sensitivity to social structures, social hierarchies, being willing to learn, and not all Americans are, and I will be the first to tell you that. It's not a my way or the highway. If we want to be liberal based thinkers and scholars of the world, we have to also take in other countries and societies' perspectives. So if you get that kind of a person into your department that wants to learn as much as they give knowledge, I think it could be adapted. Absolutely. I would like to ask how criminologists can understand the psychology behind the commitment of cybercrime and criminal actively participating in such crime, and what prevention strategies we can use for prevention of cybercrime and for safeguarding peoples. When I think of cybercrime right now, it's hacking, phishing, all of the things, the spam emails that we get. I think first of all, if we look at the psychology behind these people, what we're going to find is people who are inclined to really be drawn to computer technology. Obviously, they have to be very computer savvy. They may even be, I don't want to say introverted, but maybe they find pleasure in sitting behind their monitors for large periods of time. We also know that some of these people work in large groups or networks. I did some PhD studies on Belarus and black marketing through much of their cybercrime industries over there. So I think the psychological profile is going to be different depending on intent and what they hope to gain. We have individual hackers in this country. They are sole operators. Their entire intent is just to rob the elderly who think they know how to use computers safely, but maybe do not. And I think in prevention strategies, more and more elder care resources are educating people over the age of 65 in this country through their social programming. Nursing homes, we call them nursing homes. Sometimes they're called assisted living homes in this country. We're actually providing educational resources to our elders to help safeguard them. We do that the same with youth. I warn the young men and women in my classes, be very careful of what you share of yourself on your social media. Do not open it to the entire world. Take your friends on your social media very selectively. You can be a target. So I think that is a part of education. And if we can educate throughout the lifespan on cybercrime and what to look for, we prevent more losses. Education, you're never going to hear me say be less educated. And as all of you will be one day in your future, doctors or master students of criminology, I hope that you find education universally as appealing as I do, because we can all always learn. And I hope that you always have the curiosity to do so. Right. Let's see. We have one here. All the criminological theories on crime is also discussed about the working class people. Then Sutherland, love Sutherland, came up with white collar crime, but there is still no proper frame or structure of investigating the white collar crime. There's multiple loopholes they can bypass, and you are correct about that. And the white collar criminals tend to frequently work in financial industries, and what do they have that many of us do not? Money. And there are loopholes that federal governments, national governments all over the world don't even realize when they're legislating at the time are loopholes, and they can bypass those loopholes. In fact, in the aftermath of some of the terrorist acts against the United States, we had to implement some banking laws about monetary deposits and limits on that with reporting. For instance, under $10,000, you may not have to report on, but as soon as you make a $10,000 deposit or more, there are going to be implications to that, because we found that a lot of the white collar criminals were doing money laundering, and they were doing it from all over the world, but through American bank accounts. All I can say, Ruben Kumar, is that we have a long career ahead of us, because criminals, white collar and otherwise, they're always going to look for loopholes. And every time we legislate something new, they're going to find a new workaround. It's much like being a doctor or in the nursing occupation. There are always sick people. You will always have a job. The same can be said about crime and criminals. You will always have a job. They will always find loopholes, and if they put their intelligence to work for the good of man rather than the deviance of man, imagine what a better place this world would be. Imagine if they were all like us, just trying to study crime and abolish it. What a great place it would be. Particularly in robbery-related crime prevention, police officers use crime mapping and area identification techniques. My question is, are there any specific tools used by police officers for identifying drug trafficking and drug cultivation? Yes, but first it starts with the human. Just like we're human criminologists, human police officers in this country are drug task forces, our drug enforcement agency officers. At the local level, if you ever want to know where the drug trafficking and the drug cultivation is taking part, you go to them. And then you move outward from them. And the specific tools I used at my police department were geospatial crime mapping. And that was based on the reports that those officers brought back. And then I combined that with state database information, like my gangs database. And gangs are pretty broadly known in this country for drug trafficking. And then we just took it area by area. But always the human factor will be a part of criminological studies and how to solve future crimes and use tools. Without those officers on the ground doing the work they do, all of the computer techniques, all of the crime mapping and geospatial things that we use, we wouldn't even know where to begin. So it's what I call boots on ground. More boots on ground, we develop relationships as academics, or a word that's being adopted widely here in this country now is pracademics. Those of us who have been in the practice of policing or analysis or corrections or any other justice field, and then we become academic. And then we can teach from a knowledge base of practice combined with theory, combined with real life techniques that work, hopefully. It gives us more insight than if we're just one or the other, a practitioner or an academic. All right, it looks like we're down to the last question, Mahir Manon. If environment and social circle are primary drivers of crime, why does the vast majority of people living in high-risk surroundings choose to remain as law-abiding citizens? Kind of goes back to the twin studies. Why does one twin commit crime and the others don't? And what specific protective factors separate them from those who commit crimes? We see this over here too. I'll take you back up to the city of Louisville. Many of those old neighborhoods that have fallen into decay are still inhabited by some of the original families that bought those homes as new. They are now elderly. They are victims of the young people who are committing the crime, who have moved in with the younger generations as much as any other victim. They have lived and grown old, raised their families in these neighborhoods, and now they fear for their own lives just to sit on their front porches in their own neighborhoods. So these are obviously not people committing crimes. So the factors that separate them different generation, different societal values whenever they moved into that neighborhood, and they just never developed into criminals. What we see is what August Vollmer termed as broken windows theory, and as properties fall into decay or age, aren't kept up as well as they once were, it invites crime. With declining property values, we see younger generations who otherwise could not have afforded homes other places move into those neighborhoods. And then we have what we call that latchkey kid, where if there are two parents in the home, those parents are both working. There is that unstructured time after school. Juvenile crimes begin happening. And before we know it, that whole neighborhood has fallen into a state of crime, even though the good citizens, the adults who live there, may not be criminals at all. And I think about the only way to combat that is for police to have really great community policing strategies and develop great relationships with those in those communities that are not committing the crimes. And that takes us on to another topic I would love to teach about sometime, called community policing. But it's a huge concept here, where you know the people in your jurisdiction. They know you by name as their officer. They see you as a protector, not a persecutor. And whenever police and communities come in together, that is where some of those problems can be solved. And it's going to go back to societal implementations of structured behaviors, after school activities the kids can get into, a value on education that is sorely missing in some of these neighborhoods, and values and morals society holds dear. And when we can get all of those things together, we can start making impact. I want to thank everyone today for coming, and I appreciate you so much and for this opportunity. And one day I'm coming to Madras. You can bet on it. That's all I have for now. If our
Ma'am,
host would
with
like
your
to take
permission,
over.
with your permission, if there are any questions missed, the participants can post their question in the chat box, and we'll wait a minute.
Okay. And thank you, Malika Rohith. I hope I got your name right. Oh, and I'm glad that breaking it down. I was afraid it was a little too repetitive, but again, I knew I wasn't teaching all PhD students or all undergrad students, and I do have peers and colleagues who are far more knowledgeable than I on here. I just wanted to give a basic today, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I am also very happy that neither of my two small dogs actually barked during the whole session. Typically, they let you know that they're here. So I'm glad for that too. And I do apologize for the video not working. And thank you, Nuzia.
So I think there are no more questions. So as we come to the close of today's session of Crime, Justice and Society Dialogues, I would like to formally place on record our heartfelt thanks to our speaker, Dr. Mitzie Forrest, for delivering such an enriching lecture. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for answering those questions so patiently. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to the leadership and office bearers of the Indian Society of Criminology for their constant encouragement and support in making this lecture series possible. So my thanks also goes to all the participants, students, scholars, practitioners, and faculty members whose presence and active engagement have made the session vibrant and purposeful. So we are delighted to share the upcoming volume of the series, which will feature eminent speakers from across. Volume 3 will be presented by Dr. Michael L. Balan, OP Jindal Global University. Volume 4 will be presented by Dr. D. Rufus, Sardar Patel, University of Police, Security and Criminal Justice. Volume 5 will be presented by Dr. Yulia Zabielina, University of Alabama, USA. Volume 6 will be presented by Dr. A. Shankar Prakash, Wildlife Monitoring Enforcement System. Volume 7 will be presented by Dr. Hero Suseto, University of Indonesia. So we look forward to your continued participation in these forthcoming dialogues, which promise to broaden perspectives and deepen critical engagement with contemporary criminological issues. I kindly request all of you to regularly visit the IAC website and follow our official social media handles for announcements, registration details, and updates regarding future sessions. Once again, thank you for all being part of this meaningful beginning. We look forward to seeing you in the next volume of Crime Justice Society Dialogues. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
So-
Thank you so much
So
for
we'll
having
wind
me.
up and we'll meet in the next session. Thank you,
Thank
participants.
you. Good night to all.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night, ma'am.